All right, we're ready to get started. This is always my favorite time of this day because this is when everybody starts showing up. You know, they're an hour late and they're just realizing everybody else started an hour earlier. But I think time change is a little bit easier now because the phones switch automatically. I think that's a little bit better. I used to be scared to death that as a preacher I'd show up and the sermon was worship time's already done, and I would show up an hour late, One of those weird feelings you get.
We've got different in Mauritius. Everybody came to church on public transportation, so some would get there right at the end of the service. They just had to depend on
It just depended on the public transportation when the buses ran and everything. All right. Van, you doing okay? You feeling better? All right. Anytime you're in the middle of all those beautiful women. There you go. All right. Anybody that we need to mention that has not been mentioned yet? Okay. Brad Hall's mother is going to have a heart cath Tuesday. And so they are members over at Calvert City, but we need to remember them. Tuesday they'll have a heart cath. And that's all I know for right now as far as our sick list. All right. So we go through our list here. Yes, last Sunday, we talked about qualifications of elders and how each one of those qualifications work and how they worked as a group, not, hey, I'll take 3, you take 3, that sort of thing. As we went through, we talked about a lot of them and some of the controversial ones back and forth. Do they have to have one child? Can they have multiple children? What does it mean to be a one-woman man? If an elder's wife passes away, is he still qualified to keep working? Those sort of things. That, if you remember, we did that at the end of that week. This week, what I want us to do is, as we continue looking at elders, to talk about what they do. Because many people have no idea what elders do. In fact, a lot of elders don't know what elders do until they become elders, and they're like, oh my goodness, Growing up, I grew up in the Lord's Church, a large congregation, Eisenhower, in Odessa, Texas. And I always thought elders pretty much hung out in a boardroom somewhere. I didn't really know where the room was, but they'd always talk about the room where they met. And their job was just to kind of run the church like a business. And they just had big meetings and things like that. And that's really what my idea of what elders did and were growing up when I was a young kid. I remember one day the elders at our congregation had split the church up by groups, and I think each one of them had 50 in their group, and they decided to go visit every family. And I remember we had an elder come to our house, and I thought, uh-oh, my dad has said something to somebody. We're in trouble, Like, oh boy, this is going to be rough. Well, what is it that elders do? And so that's what I want us to talk about. It's more than just qualifications. There's a role, there's a work, there's a, if you will, a lifestyle. I think some of our former elders may say that. It becomes a lifestyle in some ways. And so the easiest way to do that is to notice the 3 titles. In the Bible, a name is very descriptive. Esau means what? Red and hairy, all right? Isn't that what you'd want to be called, red and hairy? But he was a very manly-looking man, even as a child. And so he had the name Esau. Jacob means grabber or deceiver. And so, remember, he grabbed the foot of Esau as they were being born, trying to be born first. And you see all through his life, Jacob was that way. Sarah, you have laughter, right, or joy. Abraham's talking about the father of many nations. A name is very descriptive in the Bible. And so that's why it's important to know the names of what elders are. But before we get started, as we're filling in our blanks, biblical evidence points strongly to the word there is plurality. Plurality of elders in each congregation. If it's hard to spell plurality, multiple, all right? Plurality. Hopefully I spelled that correctly. Yay. Acts chapter 20, verse 17. Paul, as he is getting ready to go back to Jerusalem, stops in Miletus, which is an outpost of Ephesus. And there he meets with the elders, multiple, of the church, singular, of Ephesus. All right? Philippians 1:1, Paul, the apostle, saint, to the elders, deacons, and saints. All right? One city, most likely one church in that city, multiple elders who are there. In Acts 15:6, you see multiple elders of the church there in Jerusalem. All right, and so that's an important thing for us to notice. In a denominational manner of organization, many churches have one pastor. He's the pastor or the bishop or the shepherd, and then they have an underlying group of deacons. That's not the way the Bible organizes the church. In the Bible, there is a plurality of elders over one congregation. So you have to have more than two. Now, do you have to have an odd number of elders so when they vote, it's never a tie? It's not in the Bible, okay? Some people like that because, they don't want to have a tie or whatever. And so some churches push for a plurality, or not only just a plurality, but an odd number. The Bible doesn't teach that. What you got, Brennan? Right, more than one. You can't just have one elder. You have to have two or more. That's right, okay? All right, there's three terms for leaders in the church or elders in the church: elders, pastors, and bishops. And that's found in Acts 20, verse 7 and 28, 1 Peter 5, 1 and 2. Let's go ahead and look in 1 Peter 5, 1 and 2. Maybe by reading that passage, you can kind of see what I'm after in that part. 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Okay? Notice with me, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 1. The elders, see that word there? Who are among you, I exhort, I'm a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, also partaker of the glory that will be revealed. All right, verse 2, what are they to do? Poime, shepherd, pastor, the flock of God, which is among you, serving as overseers or bishops or managers. See those three terms used there? Now you go to Acts chapter 20 and verse 7 and verse 28, you see those three terms again. They're called elders, they're called pastors or shepherds, and they're called bishops or managers. And so you see those three terms used interchangeably. So as we go through these, what you'll notice, elders is mentioned 194 times in the Bible. 76 times in the New Testament. But elders is the most common term given to this group of people in the Bible. That's why we call them elders usually, okay? The second most often would be bishops, and the most rare, but perhaps the most descriptive, is shepherds. And so we'll start with elders. All right, the term elder does not refer to age. How old do you have to be an elder? We went through last week and talked to Lonnie and to Bill and Ed about their age when they became elders. Most of them were around somewhere in the age of 50-ish, somewhere in that area. Is there an age limit? To be president, you have to be how old? 35, okay? Or nowadays, it seems like 100 million years old. We always get really old guys to be presidents now, it appears. But there's not an age requirement. There is an experience requirement. Now, we can't understand the mind of God, but why does God want elders to be experienced? Why would you think? Man, all these issues that come up in the church, Solomon tells us nothing new is under the sun. All right? And so these guys have been there. Hello, Pew. These guys have been here, have done that, understand all these things. What were you going to say, Ed?
Yeah, do you think when Paul was talking to Titus, he was thinking more of experience or urgency?
Okay, Titus 1:5, appoint elders in every church.
Yeah, how old was the church? How experienced were they?
Right.
Was it an urgent thing?
It was an urgent thing. A lot of these guys, especially in the first century, had been Jews all their life and had a lot of experience as far as how the Jewish faith worked. And so there was that little bit. But that's right. There was an urgency. Absolutely. What you got?
Considering David, he was anointed king
Okay.
Let him lead an army.
Yes.
Learn how to lead people before he gave him the throne.
Right. 1 Samuel 16 and around that passage, David was anointed as king, but it was years before. God made sure he had that experience before he got to that point. Okay. Good point there. All right. It's important for elders to be experienced so they know the church well. You want people who have been around the church long enough to know how things work and how things interact, how people interact, maybe the better way to say that. Every congregation is different. We're not cookie cutter. Every congregation is different. So you look at Benton, you look at Bryansburg, you look at Calvert City, Hardin, Walnut Grove. They're all formed together in a scriptural way, but the dynamics are different within each congregation. And so that's an important thing for elders. Notice some of the listing on the qualifications. I thought that would be good to put here. Being an elder, that shows that they're men of integrity. What's it mean to have integrity? It means to be true through and through. Something which is 100% of a certain way. Above reproach, somebody who's lived long enough that you can see their experience and see their character, which is there. They're respectable. They're free from a love of money, which is there. They manage the household well. We may have spent some time last week talking about it. If not, I meant to spend a lot more time. The way to recognize how an elder is going to operate, according to Paul, look at his family, how he treats his wife, how he treats his children, and how he manages them. That is the number one indicator, oftentimes, of how somebody's going to be an elder. The way in those relationships. Why? You have adult children. Can you tell adult children what to do? My mother would say yes. But do adult children always listen? My mother would say no. All right? Okay? Well, as an elder, you can command certain things oftentimes, but what we might learn sometimes is the church is sort of a volunteer organization. And so you have to learn how to manage people, how to get them to buy in, to use a modern business term, how to get them to want, how to motivate them and encourage them, to know how to admonish them in a biblical way, to make them follow the scriptures, but also still stay involved in church. And a lot of that is a relationship you're going to have with your adult children as they grow up. You're not allowed to spank church members, although sometimes people perhaps wish you could. You know, it's kind of you're dealing with your adults. All right. Manage your household well and have a good reputation. Another idea of elders, this is coming a little bit from the Old Testament, the work in which elders would do in the Old Testament. This is a very Jewish concept. When you look at elders in the Old Testament, they would stand at the gate, and it was an older group of men who had been chosen by the city. They'd stand at the gate, and they would resolve disputes. And when people would come, they would witness things for you, if it's a legal transaction or whatever. And so you had people you could always come to if you had a difficulty. You had people who you could always come to, and people who, as they looked at the city, would say, this is what we need to do. You know, this is the vision we have for Jerusalem, for Bethlehem, or for whatever. So that's a little bit what you see here. Men with vision, they've got to be willing to sacrifice time and comfort. Okay? Bob, in your time as an elder, did you ever have to sacrifice time?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit of time, a little bit of comfort. There's a lot of work that goes into being an elder. What you got, Brandon?
He had to sacrifice some of his free time to study the gospel with me last year.
Right, yeah. You know, he spent some time bringing you the gospel, you know, sharing with you and all that sort of stuff.
That was a good thing, Bob.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. Okay, they're always looking for ways to care for the flock and to lead it as well. All right. Some of that goes down to shepherds, but I thought it was good here. You got to have vision to know how to care for the flock. You've got to know, okay, these people in church, they're doing pretty well. These people are on the periphery. You know, what can we do to encourage them to be more faithful? What can we do to bring them closer to God? And you also have to lead the flock. You've got to say, okay, here's Benton right here. What is the vision we have as we go through this year, as we go through next year? What is it that we can transform these people into to really glorify God? All right? So that's elders. Now, a second word would be bishops, and it would be, other words used would be overseer. That's sometimes found in the Bible. A manager is an idea that may speak to us in a little better way as far as like what we're talking about. When you say bishop, we think church stuff, right? Or you think chess. So the word bishop doesn't really come across to us. You see overseer, that's a little bit of a manager, but we don't really use that for a boss or anybody nowadays. That's the reason I like to use the word manager. Titus 1:7, they're called stewards. In Israel, many who lived outside of Palestine needed someone to manage their lands. All right? This is where this concept comes from to those people in the first century. When the exile happened, most of Israel was sent to Babylon. When the exile ended, as you read in First Chronicles 5 has some of it, but I think it's Ezra, and some of Nehemiah will have a list of the people who come back. More people stayed behind in Babylon than moved back to Jerusalem and to Israel. And the reason for that is these people had built shops, these people had built a life, these people had gotten used to being there. And so when they were allowed to go back home, a lot of people were comfortable where they were, and they didn't come back. And so when James, the book of James opens, it's to the diaspora. That was the word which meant the spreading of Jewish people all over the world. And so many cities would have at least 10 Jewish men, and therefore they built a synagogue. But in the first century, only about 25 to 30%, and that may be a little high, of all Jews lived in Israel. Well, how did you, back in the Old Testament, determine who owned what land? You determined by your father and your father's father, and it went down, right? Remember, Judah's in a certain area in a tribe, Reuben's in a certain area in a tribe, Simeon's in a certain area, Manasseh, all those sort of things. So what would happen, I'm actually going somewhere here. What would happen is you would own a certain piece of land because it was in your ancestry. But you might live in Babylon, you might live in Ephesus, you might live in Rome, but you still own that land because it's yours, because you inherited it. But a person who lives in Rome can't go home and mow the yard, obviously. And so what you would do is you would hire people who would work that land and make a living out of it and then send a portion of the money, the proceeds, to you. And that's the reason why Jesus has several parables. Remember, a man with 5 talents, 2 talents, and 1 talent, he lives somewhere else, and he comes back to judge. That's why Jesus has a parable about the man who has a vineyard, and he sends back people, and the people who are at the vineyard think they own it, and so they keep killing everybody, and eventually they end up killing the man's son. That's the concept that is going there. And so what you see here when you bring this word into the church is that Christ owns the church. Christ is the head of the church. But Jesus in that physical entity is not here. And so he's left it to managers, to overseers, to make sure that the church is run well. Now, that was a long illustration. Did y'all keep up with all that? When he looks at our elders, he's saying, hey, here is the Benton Church of Christ. How are you managing, how are you working this congregation to bring a return to God? Now, he does not necessarily care about the bank account when we think about the return. He's thinking about souls. He's thinking about growth. He's thinking about those sort of things. That's why elders have the right to, in matters of liberty, make different rules. You know, what time are we going to meet? Are we going to meet at 8? Are we going to meet at 12? Some older people wish we could meet at 8 because they're already up. They like to do everything early in the morning. Some of the millennial folks are like, hey, let's meet at 1, right? You know, that's when I want to get up. And so, you know, everybody's different. They, as they manage the church, hey, let's do it this way, and this is a way that will bless the most people and cause the church to be what it ought to be. And that's that idea of a manager or an overseer as it comes across. All right, men who rule well. To rule well does not mean to have total authority, but it means to lead somebody in a good way that shows profit, okay? So they don't have total authority over things of Jesus, but it means that they are leading in a good way, okay? All right, not as, what is it, 1 Peter 5:3 says? Not as, let's look that verse up. Because I am thinking Hebrews 13 is, not as lords. Yeah, thank you, Dan. Not as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock, okay? And that's that word there, pathia, in the Greek. Means to someone who can persuade, listen to obey, and to follow, all right? Okay. Their authority is as a group and not as an individual, all right? Authority is as a group, this is talking about elders, and not as an individual. All right, this is a touchy subject, but one we got to talk about a lot. It is hard for a church not to have a head elder. It's just difficult because you put 4 people in a room, somebody's going to end up being the leader. Some people are more eloquent and can speak publicly. Some people are more forceful. You know, in their life, they've learned to do certain things, and they're type A personalities. And it is difficult not to have a head elder. But you hurt the church when you don't work as a team. And when you allow one guy to run the show, guess what? Every one of us are infallible. And so you need to really work as a team or as a group. And so it's important to recognize their authority comes in a group. Their authority is not necessarily towards one person who's making all the rules all the time. The elders need to work together. Does that make sense? Why do you think it's so hard to not have a head elder? Yeah, sometimes somebody's just going to take over. Okay. Yes, ma'am, Marilyn? Okay, yeah. So you say it's wise to have an uneven number because as far as voting or whatever. Okay. Yeah, that's true. And if a church wants to have an odd number of elders, not an odd elder, an odd number of elders, is that okay? Yeah, you can do what you want. We are autonomous as a church. If you want to do things that way, there is nothing in the world wrong with it. It's not binding. You know, this church has an even number of elders. They're not a real church of Christ because they're not really following the Bible. That's not what we're talking about. But if a church wants to work in that direction, they sure can. Yeah, that is an opportunity. Yes, sir.
I think the greatest danger to an eldership is lack of confidentiality among the elders. They need to not have any gossip coming out of the eldership.
Okay.
Our eldership here does well.
Yeah, they do.
But there's some elders that want to tell their wife everything, and then she wants to be in charge of all the gossip and so forth. That'll split a church worse than anything.
Okay.
So I think really the integrity of the elders and understanding of confidentiality and the things that you know that don't need to go out to the congregation about somebody's reputation or who picked up $5 from the plate as it passed, and there's some things it's best just
Right.
to not tell everybody. Just go and talk to the person that sinned.
Very true. I don't know if everybody catches what's said on the mic. The reason I walk around in Bible class is not to get skinnier. It's to so everybody can hear on the radio or live stream what's said. I'm not sure if this mic picks folks up. What he just said was perhaps one of the most important parts of being an elder is integrity, realizing confidentiality. If you're wanting people to be able to come and open up to you and talk about issues they have, you gotta keep it quiet. You can't really go tell everybody else. And sometimes there's a danger when you tell your spouse or tell somebody else. The more people that know something, the harder it is to keep it in. And so it's very important that integrity, that confidentiality remains, that it's there.
Well, there was a time that, and I remember when maybe there'd be a split decision over something, and then we make another motion, and everybody would vote for it, even though you didn't the first time.
Okay.
It's a unanimous decision.
Yeah. And I think,
That worked well.
I think that was one of the, I don't know if it's still a rule with the elders, whenever they have a vote, and you know it's a split decision, they always have a revote, and everybody votes in the direction of the winner. That way, there's not a split as far as things go on with that.
Well, it's not exactly everybody votes for the direction of the winner all the time. What happens is exactly what Ed said. There's all kinds of differences of opinion regarding issues.
Right.
But, and sometimes a majority has to carry, and you don't get everybody. But when an eldership votes for a thing, even if you didn't like it, then it's your thing. You embrace it.
Right.
don't
And
go
you
out-
have to, yeah.
Don't go out and have a
Can't say
second
I
opinion.
told you so.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Don't allow there to be two congregations form in one church.
And it's important for the
Oh, I ran out of time. Okay, shepherds, all right? Okay, they are shepherds for the flock or keepers of the flock, okay? And shepherds love the flock. They are in the people business, all right? You're in the people business if you're a shepherd. Lynn Anderson wrote a book many, many years ago talking about elders, and he said, if you're an elder, you're going to smell like the sheep, all right? Folks who are on farms or whatever understand what it means to smell like the livestock. If you're out there working, feeding, or taking care of them, and he says that's what elders got to be. All right, thank you for being here. Go home. Don't stay. We'll meet at 6 o'clock tonight.